Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. The last episode featured a fun discussion about the Golden Girls, and I've had many solos tell me that they want to create a Golden Girls living situation in their golden years. To that end, I invite two members of the solo community to talk about options for shared living beyond what the Golden Girls did. Our first guest is Darlene Savoy. She hails from the east coast of Canada, and after a 20-year hiatus has recently returned to live there. A self-described late bloomer, she aspires to create a friendly, co-housing development for solos. You may be familiar with her as a guest co-host on the recently launched episode, Reinvention with Arlene Dickinson. Our second guest is Ben Lough. Ben is a professor of social work and business administration at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He's the director of social innovation at the School of Business, where he supports student social ventures and teaches courses in nonprofit management, social entrepreneurship, and international social development. We identify and define shared living options. Some will be familiar and some will be new. We also discuss some considerations for those of you contemplating shared living. I call them the 4 C's: cost, convenience, community, and care. But along the way, we discover a fifth: climate, as in minimizing one's effect on climate change. We close with some advice and resources for those contemplating shared living. Finally, bonus material is back. As you know, I host a private solo community which you can be part of by applying at petermcgraw.org/solo. The three of us take a survey about our preferences for shared living, and we discuss our similarities and differences and make some jokes at my expense along the way. You can find the audio on the Solo Slack channel. It's a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Welcome, Darlene.
Hi, Peter.
And welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled you folks are here. We're here to talk about alternative living arrangements for solos. And we're looking beyond the obvious: owning or renting a home or a condo, apartment, and so on. And we're going to have some focus towards the end of the conversation on your later years as a solo, our later years. We're all very young here. At least my two guests are young. I'm the old guy in the room. Speaking of which, our previous excellent episode was about the cultural phenomenon known as the Golden Girls. And what's notable about the Golden Girls were that these 4 women lived together in the same house. Do you know what city they lived in?
Don't know.
Do you know what state they lived in?
California?
I'm not sure. I never watched it, Peter.
Where do old people
Florida.
Yes.
Florida.
Yes.
But I think they were in Miami. I'm pretty sure they were in Miami.
All right.
So I've been doing some work on aging, retiring, and dying solo. And for obvious reason, this comes up a lot. Oh, you're single? You're going to be single forever? Who's going to take care of you when you grow old? What are you going to do? How are you going to do this? Right? It's a common question. And frankly, it's actually a pretty reasonable question. I mean, of the dumb questions that single people get asked, it's not actually quite dumb. I think
one of the least dumb.
It's one of the least dumb questions. And it's something I'm actively thinking about, preparing for. I think the sooner you start thinking about it, the better. And so housing is clearly going to be one of those. And what's really great about this is both Ben and Darlene are members of the Solo Slack channel. And they, or was it Darlene, pitched this idea to me. And then these two forced me to tape this conversation, which I appreciate. It's a long time coming. So we're going to talk about shared living. I am a novice. Like, I've done a little bit of reading, but you two are the pros. Why are you the pros? Like, what is your journey? How did you get to a place where you're nerding out on the Solo Slack channel, which, by the way, you can apply for at petermcgraw.org/solo. We'd love to have you. A few hundred people on there already. What happened? So, Ben, maybe you start. You're thinking about, did you buy a house?
Yeah, so I think I started thinking about shared living probably not that long ago, to be honest, about 5 years ago. I did a lot of international travel professionally, and so as a young person lived in a lot of hostels and did kind of the shared living experience abroad. But as I started getting older and I started having roommates and then I'd live alone and both kind of okay to me, I'm pretty agnostic about whether living alone or living with others is better. But I started thinking about whether the sociality that a shared living arrangement brings could add value beyond solo living, just living by yourself in an apartment or a condo or a house. So I started, really thinking about possibilities for that for myself, but also for other people who may not have this opportunity because just the way we're thinking about housing, which isn't always super innovative. We still have a lot of really traditional models of housing. So I was thinking about it for myself, but also how do we change the industry and how do we get more people involved in thinking about alternative housing options?
And if I may, the standard model is like a home, a detached home, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we think about like it starting as farmhouses more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And now, suburban living and so on, which is so dominant in the United States. And then the alternative being buildings, high rises or low rises that are condos or apartments. And for the most part, those feel like the only two options in the
for
sense,
solos.
for solos. And just because like when you look around, they just dominate the market.
Totally. And also I think solo people don't often think about living with roommates or living with myself. Mm-hmm. And those are kind of the options. But there's really much more variety in terms of possibilities.
Yes. And if I may, before we get to Darlene, what is the saying is like, you're not just studying this, you're living this. So you're actually experimenting with a shared living space. Yes?
Well, I wish I could say yes. I'm actually living alone, but I purchased a house recently that I'm converting into a co-living space.
Okay.
So I anticipate in the next few years I'll be living with others. I may keep my house as well because I do. We'll talk about that later if you want, but I do want to have a room in this place so that I have the option of the sociality of
that's fun.
co-living. Yeah.
And how big is this place?
3,600 square feet.
Okay. And how many bedrooms?
5 bedrooms.
How many bathrooms? That's what I. Please tell me there's 10 bathrooms.
No, this house was built in 1904, so there is actually a problem about the bathroom situation. So I'm going to make it into 4. I'm going to make 4 bathrooms. Right now it's got 2. The idea is 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and then it's got quite a bit of shared space. So the whole first floor is shared space, the whole third floor is shared space, and then the whole second floor is private space.
Last question. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be seeking solo tenants?
Yeah. So I think, when you mentioned the traditional model, I think, again, solo people often think living by yourself or with roommates. Mm-hmm. In the past, older adults have thought about maybe living with others. Mm-hmm. I know we'll probably get to that. But I think for young professionals, I live in Urbana-Champaign. So it's a town where there's a lot of, college town, kind of middle of nowhere. It's a land-grant university. So it's surrounded
I've been there. You're not exaggerating. Yeah.
No, it really is. It's like cornfields, soybeans. It's a beautiful place, but it's pretty rural. And so people come here really to work at the university. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of PhD students, new faculty who come here not knowing yet if they want to buy a place or whatever. So there's a big market, I think, for professionals who want to share space for different reasons.
Indeed.
So that's kind of what I'm hoping to tap into.
That's great. That's exciting. How about you, Darlene? How many homes do you own with the desire to?
0 homes owned. Leading up to this podcast, I was trying to think what brought me here. I really pondered it for a while, and I thought, I don't know. I had to think about it. And I think a few things kind of all came together around the same time. So I grew up in a really tight-knit, small-town community, small-town New Brunswick, Miramichi. Nobody's
This
probably
is New
ever heard of
Brunswick,
it.
Canada, not
That's
New Brunswick,
right.
New Jersey, where I went to college.
Shout out to the
Way different
Miramichiers
places.
in the crowd. That's right. East coast of Canada, Maritimes to be specific. And when I became a teenager and grew up, I wanted to flee as quickly as I could. And I traveled a lot. I lived in a lot of cities. I was married for a while, and then I moved to a variety of cities. And so I was always kind of, looking for the next thing and always seeking, looking for community, looking for the next best job, the next best city, not quite finding what I was looking for. And then right before COVID hit, moved back to the East Coast and stayed with my parents. Ended up being a lot longer than expected because COVID.
Sure.
The punchline of the last couple of years because COVID. And in doing that, I just had a lot of time to think. And I think that's what brought it all together for me. It was planning my future from a place where I had a lot of time to think. Wasn't all roses and puppies because there was moments where it was quite dark, but I took that time and I thought about my future and I planned. Okay, well, I want to make extra money. There's an opportunity to be, the housing situation is not very good. There's a shortage. And then I thought about what do I want? Where do I want to live? And then I found this co-housing idea and I just went down the rabbit hole of co-housing, co-living and all of this. Read a couple books, started attending webinars. Then I joined a real estate investment group sort of in tandem.
Okay.
Now, the icing on all of this cake was that I discovered single positive podcasts at the same time.
Huh.
Right? Like yours and like some others
Wait,
out
there's
there.
others?
There's others. Yeah. And so it all kind of came together at the same time, realizing, there's other options out there for singles and singles are underserved. Like there are things that we want and I'm not seeing them. So that means there's got to be other people out there who are also looking for this. So business opportunity, what do I want? Like it just all everything just kind of swirled together. I guess.
And so just to preview this, we're going to next step in and talk about what are some of the options and what are they called and so on. Like this, we'll do a little bit of educating. And then we're going to talk about, is this right for you? Right. And so what are some of the advantages? Because for some people, they think disadvantages first, or it just seems uncertain. It's disfluent. It's not part of the narrative. In the United States, it drives me crazy that Americans are seeking to build wealth by buying and selling homes from each other. And as you know, homes are generally built for families. Apartments are built either for singles or couples, and so then you might even buy an apartment in terms of a condo. So I'm eager to get into this. And we'll talk about some of the advantages of these, and we're going to depart with a little bit of advice from the two of you. And the next episode, if I can preview this, Darlene's going to return, and we're going to talk about some of the even more innovative ideas that are looming out there, which I think are quite good. So let's jump in. Is that good?
It's great.
Sounds
all right.
Good.
Ben, you already mentioned something, and that was just roommates, right? So I think this is a very interesting idea. We tend to think about roommates at particular stages of life, right? Which is college and 20s as you're trying to kind of find your footing in the world. But solos often have roommates. So we already talked about the Golden Girls. Those are their roommates, of sorts. There's also, I want to bring up another, this is a throwback, but do you guys remember The Odd Couple?
Yes.
Right.
See, we've aged ourselves again.
So The Odd Couple, these are two, middle-aged, older gentlemen who live together, right? And this stuff happens. Obviously, Three's Company, right? That was,
I do know that one.
That was a phenomenon. In part, why was Three's Company a phenomenon? Because one of the roommates was a guy, right? And the idea that two women and a guy would live together was scandalous.
So taboo.
And so the guy had to pretend to be gay, had to do something else scandalous in order to justify living with these two attractive, vivacious women. So roommates, what's the story? Solos and roommates. I don't have one. I don't want one. Convince me why I should be thinking differently, or why there are people who should think differently than I do.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I don't think I want to convince you otherwise. I think it's what do people want with their life situation. I think roommates, often people start out getting roommates because of necessity. So they often do it as students. It's a low cost option. They're living with other people. It may not be their preference. It may be their preference, but it may not be their preference. And so I think co-living is similar in the sense that you get people living together. It's not necessarily only 2 or 3. It could be 4 or 5 or 6. But I think the biggest difference is that co-living, which is different than cooperative living and also different than co-housing, which we'll talk about. But co-living...
Ladies and gentlemen, get out your notepads and pens.
There's a lot of very similar terms that mean very different things. But co-living doesn't actually save you money. It's not a good choice for saving money, but it is a good choice if you want to have greater sociality in your life. You want a community of others who maybe are similar to you or think in similar ways that you do. You have a private space, but you actually prefer to live with other people. And so I think that's the biggest difference that I see in terms of co-living versus roommates is really the intention behind it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about saving money.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have to say, I just recently acquired a roommate for the first time in many, many, many years.
Besides your cats.
Besides my cats.
Man or woman.
They don't pay a cent. It's crazy.
They really don't. They're so cheap.
They really
rent free.
High maintenance. But yeah, one of my, sitting in my parents' home and planning, I discovered, financially, if I wanted to do these things, one thing I could do was, and it was difficult to make that decision because, like you, Peter, not what I would choose, but it's definitely out of necessity. I just feel like it's necessary right now for me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been an adjustment.
Yeah, the thing I want to bring up about roommates, if I can, and then we'll pivot into co-living, if I may. I have a very close friend who has a roommate. She calls her the wifey. They're incredibly close, and for the most part, they get along really well.
Mm-hmm.
There are some points of tension here and there, as you might imagine, and so on. And this friend is considering living on her own. But to be honest, she does better with a roommate. It's just like her psychology, her emotions, her mental health
like a
is much
support
better.
System of it.
Exactly. And but I remember her saying to me, I feel like a loser with roommates in my 30s.
And imagine really in your 40s.
Yeah, or your 50s or whatever
50s,
it is.
Yeah.
But I really push back on that because I think that's an old model. It's an old way of thinking, and it's a little narrow, to be honest. Right?
Yeah.
Like, roommates are there. It's like, it isn't that thing that you're just, I'm waiting to grow up. And so I have roommates. And then once I grow up, then I can shuck the roommates and find my one roommate forever kind of thing.
I agree.
Yeah, Ben, you
it's often called like delayed adulthood in the literature. I do a lot of research on this stuff, and I'm always kind of pissed at that statement of like delayed adulthood. Like you're getting roommates because you haven't figured out how to grow up or something.
That's
and
really
I think
annoying.
It's a really different. Yeah, I agree, but I think it mimics what you're saying, Peter. That I think people feel some stigma around living with another person. For me, I'm pretty agnostic, so I'll have maybe. In terms of a year, people will move in and out. I do have one or two roommates at any point in time. And right now I'm living alone, but for me, it's always an adjustment. When people come in, I get used to them. And it takes me a couple weeks to adjust, and I just kind of like, this is life. And then they leave, and it takes me a couple weeks to adjust to being kind of living solo again. So I'm 45 right now. And I'm sure that people from the outside probably do look at that, and I don't know what they think, to be honest. I don't.
And by the way, who cares?
Yeah.
That's
how I feel.
That's
about
what we should say. Yeah.
I'm like, who cares?
cares?
Like,
but
what other people think?
We all kind of care what people think, right? But things are changing, and I think that's the point, that if more people recognize that co-living is an option, and it is becoming more of an option, maybe roommates, the term itself is demeaning. I don't know, but I think if you call it co-living, it's cool and it's chic and it's like the thing people are doing. So maybe it's just a switch of language, and maybe that will help with the stigma.
Yeah. As an aside, if I may just reference back to one of my favorite episodes called Waiting. So Kennerit, this Israeli sociologist, and Iris, who's a behavioral scientist, we actually address what does it mean to be an adult. And we settle on, I think, an elegant definition, and that is, can you parent yourself? That's the only standard by which to judge whether someone's an adult, right?
There are no standard.
There are no markers or milestones or ceremonies or number of people in your household or whatever it may be. And so just a friendly reminder to those of you who haven't caught that. So you've talked about co-living. It also goes by the term flatting.
In New Zealand, the UK, Australia, those sort of English and English colonies, it's pretty much called flatting.
Flatting sounds like the new planking to me, but nonetheless.
I don't know. Is flatting a cool term, or is that like
I think it could be. I mean, I call an apartment a flat sometimes.
Okay.
And so I like that idea of a flat. I like that you
it's very
cut
European.
off a bunch of syllables. I sound more like a global citizen.
Great. Flatting. Yeah.
So how is co-living, aka flatting, different than having roommates? What is it?
I mean, it's having more roommates often, but more than that, roommates typically, you're all paying rent and you're kind of just living together. Co-living is managed often in a different way than just roommates is managed. So typically you're paying an extra fee to have the place cleaned. You're paying a fee to have, conflicts managed, for example, if there's issues around that. There's often events that are planned. So the management will plan an event. It'll be much more in term, sort of community-based or community-focused. So there's a lot of different ways that I see the difference. But what do you think, Darlene, given your knowledge of co-living?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. When I think of co-living, I think of people having a little bit of their own space that they.
So you might have your own room.
You might have your own bathroom. You know what I mean? And then, so like you said, management or some layer on top of it where there's a third party involved usually. Whereas roommates, you've got I rented this apartment because the vacancy in the city is almost zero, and so took the initiative to get a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and then find a roommate. So the onus is on me if he doesn't pay the rent. You
have to negotiate conflicts and so on.
Yeah. So it's a very different
and
model.
also in terms again, I guess the money thing. So if you're co-living, you're probably in a nicer space, so you have furniture that's not chewed up by rats or dogs or whatever. So it's nicer accommodations. You can save money in the sense that you're not paying as much for the stuff, for the type of living that you're getting. So you're getting more bang for your buck. Whereas again, roommates is kind of just like you're trying to save money often.
Yeah. So it reminds me a little bit of like, and I say this in a positive way, sort of like elevated dormitory living, elevated residence. Like, the model a little bit is like there's a building. Yeah.
Some similarities, but probably less separate. And more in a house, like in a house or.
But in a house, but in more like a house or.
Or if it's in a big building, I mean, you could have multiple units that all share space. So maybe like 4 or 5 people living in a room, and then like 4 of those rooms together, and the shared space is 20 people.
Okay.
So in that sense, I could see what you're saying, Peter, in terms of the dormitory. But often it's also just a house, right? So it's 5 people living in a house.
And it seems
I mean, that's the most familiar sort of feeling. You have your own private space. There's community space. There's someone who manages, deals with problems, and so on. So what strikes me as one advantage of this, besides the fact that, again, there's this idea of the negotiations and the dealing with other people that, obviously we're social creatures. We know that solos like other people generally, you know what I mean? Like that's one of the myths of the idea is like, yes, some solos are loners, but many of us are actually really deeply connected and broadly connected and like other people. We just don't, for now or forever, want that one person dominating our attention, our relationships. And so it provides that. But it also seems a little more, and this is something that I'm noticing the more I study singles, is that singles, first of all, are more mobile than couples. They move around a lot more. They appreciate the flexibility. They're more nimble too. That is, they have less stuff. As someone who just moved into an apartment and had to consolidate, I've been trying to get rid of stuff. I like not having stuff. And so now I don't have to own a couch, or I don't have to own as much kitchenware, right? So this idea of if I want to pick up and go somewhere else, I can do so much more easily than pulling in a big 18-wheeler up to the house.
And it seems like there's these new co-living groups or companies that are affiliated with, across different cities around the world, right? Like those boutique ones like Rome, or
you can go to Bali, you can go to Rome, you can go to Italy, New York, wherever, and you can buy in, right? So you actually have a stake in that. And I think you mentioned
the new timeshare.
It is kind of, right? But it's a hell of a lot cheaper and you actually use it.
Without having to sit through the afternoon sales pitch.
That's right. But they are furnished. So I think that's a big difference too between roommates. You bring in your own stuff. So typically all the shared space is furnished, and then the bedrooms are left largely unfurnished. So there's a bed, maybe a night table, but they want it to be unfurnished so that you feel like it's your personal space and stuff. But yeah, for the most part, totally furnished. And so you're not supposed to bring your stuff with you.
I see. Yeah, I think that's interesting. As a quick aside, if you are solo and you're renting an apartment, you basically have 2 options when it comes to furniture. You either buy furniture or you rent furniture. And at this point, renting furniture is not good.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah,
You can, but it's terribly disappointing, especially if you have any sense of design or taste.
I can imagine.
You know, because it gets quite expensive very quickly.
Yeah.
And so you're sort of better off buying cheap, good-looking furniture. It's wasteful.
Disposable furniture. Yeah.
So I'm sure people are going, okay, I get this co-living thing. How's that different than being a part of a co-op? Like, I think that's a term that people sort of know. What is a co-op or cooperative housing? How is that different?
Well, there seems to be a few different, we debated this a little bit, didn't we, Ben? There seems to be a few different definitions.
Well, Canada and US have different definitions on lots of stuff, but what's Canada's saying?
Well, and that's the thing. As soon as I started going, researching it, there seems to be multiple definitions even within Canada. The definition I'm familiar with is kind of these older buildings that were kind of built by government in like the 70s, 80s, whatever. And then, people move into them. They have to apply. They have to be low income. And then you move in and then you buy a share, but you're not really it's not like buying into a condominium. I mean, you pay a few $100 and then you pay rent essentially, but it's not technically rent. It's a co-op, and you're now a member and you vote and you might have some shared gardens and all of that. But the definition that you came up with, that also exists in Canada. So
okay,
yeah,
I think it's a similar model. The difference being, so the way I see a co-op is instead of paying rent, so you're paying rent and somebody is getting that check and they're making a little bit of money off of the rent. But the co-op is you are collectively paying the mortgage. So you decide together, like, oh, we're going to come together, we're going to pay this mortgage on this house, which means if you have, say you have a mortgage that's $2,000 and you have 6 people, then you're not paying a ton of money. That's the money you're paying to live in the house. And so whether you're doing the Canadian model, I think, I don't know much about the Canadian model, but I think if you're owning like a condo in a bigger building, and it's subsidized by governments even, and governments sometimes do offer incentives for co-housing or co-op, not co-housing, cooperative living, then it is a money saver for sure. But I think the biggest difference is that as a cooperative, as a group, you're paying a mortgage. And they could be friends, but it also could be some people in a government program. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, and I've also heard it called co-ownership. There's so many
probably similar story.
Yeah, there's houses in, for example, GTA, which is the Toronto area, so it's very expensive, bigger city in Canada, and they have groups that actually help match up people who want to buy a house together, and they call that co-ownership, as opposed to a co-op, where it would be like single dwellings throughout the building.
Okay, but in general, a co-op, you have your own private space still. And it might be in a flat or an apartment, or it might be a single room and shared?
No, it'd be more like an apartment.
It's more of an apartment.
Or condo, yeah.
That's more the Canadian model, though.
Oh, yeah, that's the Canadian model.
That's important. So I would say in the U.S. model, like co-op, often you've got like 10 to even to 15 people living in a house.
Okay.
And it's kind of a hippie, kind of vegan culture where everyone's sharing resources. And so
I have a friend who
has
did
that
this.
culture.
Yes. I had this thing.
And I was trying to figure out the difference between that and co-living. And I think the difference is ownership, right?
Ownership's a big one. Yeah.
Because co-living, you don't own, you rent. Okay. Anyway.
I'm just going to go on record here to say I have zero interest in a co-living.
I'm not surprised, Peter.
I know anybody who listens to this knows, like, I don't want to go to these meetings.
No.
I know.
I don't want to vote.
No, but that's what also turns me off to co-op. It's self-governed, right? So you're going to these meetings once a week to manage problems and concerns. It's not managed, and it's zero appeal to me.
But some people really like that stuff because it's like you get enmeshed and you care about these things and you have a say. And so I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's wrong for me.
Yep,
and I have a good friend. There's many of these, not many, but there's some of these in Boulder. He lived in one in Boulder. And it worked very well for his personality. He's an easygoing guy, and he's like you said, he's a little hippy dippier than I am, and it just and he sort of liked chipping in, and it was his night to make dinner. Like it had a very communal feel to it, and I think, and again,
I have some friends too. I mean, and they love it here. Here in Urbana, and part of what they love is actually the conflict. They like getting together and resolving conflict and talking about it. And they think it's like self-growth and it's a way to learn about. And I think,
that's great.
No, I don't need that anymore. I don't.
Yeah.
But whatever.
But you know, that's the thing that I think what is really great about this conversation. It actually just flows from this idea that we're not all meant to partner up, or we're not all meant to be partnered for our entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're not all meant to either live in a family unit or live alone. Like some of us are meant to live in this sort of communal with either more or less control. And in one case, you're just like, let the management folks deal with this. And in the other case is like, I'm going to just wade into this and we're going to just scrap and claw. And by the end, we're going to all be crying and hugging and singing Kumbaya.
Exactly. It's great.
They've actually created techniques and entire sociocracy. Have you heard of that?
Oh,
you know, for resolving conflict in these kinds of developments. Yeah,
it's fabulous. I if you know anything, I have very strong opinions about myself, but I have very strong opinions about not telling other people what they should be doing when it comes to this stuff.
I was saying, I told one of the co-op guys that I was doing this co-living thing, and he honestly couldn't understand it either. He's like, "Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just like live with other people and self-govern it?" And I'm like, "Because some people really don't want to do that." And he couldn't get it. Like he didn't get it. So everyone's just different in terms of their needs. But I think there's a lot of options, housing options, to appeal to these different needs.
Yeah, and we need more, I think, is where we're headed with this.
Yeah.
So the last one that I want to talk about is co-housing. All these co's. There's too many co's.
So many co's.
So many co's.
What is co-housing?
Well, I see co-housing as being a group of people has to come together first, and they generally create this community, and then it can take up to, some of these communities take 10 years to create because it's a lot of red tape, and they end up creating, sort of a mission statement with their values. They buy the land, they go, they buy, they hire the architect, the developers, everything, and they build individual dwellings, houses. Sometimes it's in a more country, rural setting, the stereotypical one would be, the nuclear families all living in their kids are all playing together in the cornfields, and shared gardens and shared workshop, shared kitchen, shared meals, and it's kind of like usually based in a strata model, like a condominium. So you're paying for your own house, but then there's extra fees on top that would cover the shared grounds.
I see. Okay.
And then there'd also be other communications between them. But there's also urban ones as well. Like there's one in
so you might buy a building and do this.
Swan Market. Have you heard of that one? And I think it's in Oakland.
Okay.
And they just basically took a market and that had been left and just gutted it and made it into an entire essentially like an apartment building with a cafeteria.
Once these things are built, there's going to be some turnover. So someone could apply. I assume you apply to
I don't think you have to apply necessarily. It depends on how they've structured their arrangement. But I think usually they almost see it as a self-selection process. Like if a person comes in and they look around, sometimes people vote, but I think sometimes they just assume it'll work out.
They're just like, if you want in.
Yeah, if you want in that badly and you hang out with us for a little while and you still want to move here.
Right.
That's a sense.
It's often multi-generational too, right, Darlene? So it's quite different in the sense that you're trying to really recreate like a little microcosm of the world with, say, 10 houses that are sharing a common green space or something, right? So
I see.
It's a very different sort of model.
And some of them have businesses involved. So they're hybrid, residential and business all rolled into one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. I can imagine, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the business behind this in the next episode when we talk about some of the more innovative options here. It sounds like there's also the potential for like development. A developer to go and do this, to have the vision and then recruit the people, or as you're describing, the people come together and then have the vision and do this. I want to describe, I have a friend, she's a lifelong solo, and I think she's retired now from her job. And this topic came up because we were talking about, aging, retiring solo. And her plan, which she's working on executing, is she has several girlfriends who are also solos. And their plan is to all buy condos in the same building.
Nice.
And then the idea is we're going to care for each other. We're going to keep each other company. We're going to care for each other and so on. Where does that sort of fit in these buckets that we're talking about? Or is this...
I'd put it squarely in co-housing, but I don't know what Darlene would say. And
I
the
don't know
reason
if
for that
it's
is
as
because they have,
organized as co-housing. I don't know if it's as organized.
well, they have their
as
individual
co-housing.
units, right? So I think all
Yeah.
the other models, you're living in a common space.
I
Whereas I think the only model that allows for individual private residencies, and I would say a condo is a private residency,
Yes.
would be co-housing.
Yeah, I'm not sure it fits into any of them. I think it's a great
maybe
idea.
It's a new thing. It's a new
Okay.
hybrid.
Well,
a
maybe-
new
It's
hybrid
just
model.
another idea. We should come up with a name for it, though.
As long as the word co is not involved in it.
My uncle does exactly
has to
that.
be.
I just thought of that. My uncle, him and his wife, before she passed away, moved into a building, and they have a bunch of friends in the same building.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in
great.
a very friendly building right now. I would love it if I could move a bunch of my friends in. To
Kick some other
units.
people
Yeah.
out.
Well, you
Yeah.
could.
I could.
Convince 'em.
That's true.
Yeah.
Although I have a lot of friends that I don't want in the building.
There you go.
Sure.
Just invite the ones you like. That's the co-housing model. It's like you self-select.
I like them all. It's just
Okay.
some I want in the building and some I don't. Okay, so this is great. I think so. I'm just going to try to recap this as a layperson. So we have the traditional roommates. You manage it yourself, or the roommate who's bringing people in manages themselves. One or more roommates in an apartment or a house. You have co-living. Again, these are smaller groups of people, 4 to 10 people. And they choose this living space to live in, but someone manages it, takes care of the cleaning, does the kind of heavy lifting with regard to managing that thing. Then there is cooperative or co-op housing, which is which has that same feel, but is communal. So it's governed by the tenants, by the residents of that space, paying rent, so to speak, and covering the cost of the unit. And then lastly, we talked about co-housing, which is a development of sorts, maybe rural, suburban, or urban, where you have your own living space, but there is also shared living space and a kind of common vision about maybe lifestyle values. And
Maybe
so
some shared
right.
meals,
shared
kids
some
playing
shared
with
meals.
grannies.
I can imagine programming, right? Like Thursday night
programming for
happy
sure.
hours and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
There's a lot of seniors co-housing now as well.
Yes, I
Yeah.
can see that.
And this model, that model has been around a long time, Peter, in Scandinavia. So there's plenty of history around that. It's just new for the U.S.
I see. Let me ask one other question, because we're going to pivot into something where we're going to talk a little bit more about growing older. And that is this model of retirement, community, assisted living, nursing home, hospice. I'm actually moving my hands
Yes.
along
The spectrum.
the spectrum where you can
Looking
imagine
towards death.
this. Yes.
All the way to the end.
You pick this space, right? You pick this space, and as you might lose functionality, maybe your health starts to suffer, you might move into your 80s, 90s, and so on, where you need more care. And then depending on how things, you kind of move through this path. That is also a shared living arrangement of sorts. There, especially as you move from your own unit into maybe assisted living, and certainly a nursing home. Now there might be a cafeteria, shared meals, people who come in and check on you, cleaning services,
Yes, that's right.
and so on.
Nursing.
And so on.
It's like the extreme co-living experience.
It's extreme co-living series. And some of these places are kind of turnkey of sorts. Like you kind of sign up for them.
Some of them are very luxury. Some of them are just more utilitarian.
Yes, that's right. And some are government sponsored.
State
Obviously a
sponsored.
lot of nursing homes and so on are. It's why you folks want to be listening to Financial Freedom with Money Amy, so you can afford the nicer ones.
Yes.
Because they're
There's a
super
difference.
expensive as institutions, right? But I think there's kind of smaller, more innovative models where kind of more like we're talking about in terms of a smaller group of maybe younger and older people living together, even if they're fairly well on their way to death. Maybe where they don't need quite as much healthcare, but they're still not super functional. They can live at a much lower cost with younger people who maybe also don't have the money.
Yes.
And this, again, is a common model in Scandinavia or otherwise, but we just don't have that model really in the U.S.
So this is perfect segue because I do care about talking about some of these options. So let's talk about this. How do you make some of these decisions, especially as you're getting older? So I'm so proud of myself. I came up with the 4 C's.
All right.
More C's. Cost, convenience, community, and care. So I think we've touched on each of these a little bit, but I want to dive a little more deeply into this. So let's talk about maybe costs. In general, which of these are better for people who are price sensitive and which of these are better for people who are price insensitive?
So maybe I'll start talking about co-living, because I think a lot of people think that co-living, because you're living with other people, is saving money. It doesn't necessarily save money. It's again about the sociality that comes on top of, other, a nicer place or whatever. So on the convenience side of your C,
Okay.
There's a lot more of that in co-living. But I think it's certainly with cooperative housing, you're saving a lot of money.
Okay.
But you're also often living in squalor. So not always for sure. But
hey, let's be easy on our hippie friends.
I know. It's just a
Not to
different.
be confused with a commune, which also
No,
starts with C.
which is also its own C, right? It starts with CO. But it's not necessarily a cost saving option. It's about the same market price as maybe a studio.
So co-living. So maybe we should do this the other way. So co-living is a little bit more about convenience, a community.
Yep.
And perhaps, depending on the model, care.
Perhaps.
But but convenience and community. Darlene, does that resonate?
Yeah, sounds
that
right.
Okay. So then what about the others? Let's talk about them one at a time. So the next would be co-op. So that's cost.
Yes.
Convenience.
Lower cost.
Maybe.
Maybe.
You put in a lot of work.
You put in a hell of a
Might
lot
actually
of
be
work.
more work.
It's more work. It's definitely more work.
So costs go down, convenience go down.
down.
Community goes way, way up.
Way up.
Super up. Yeah, it's
Right?
probably the
It's like
highest. community
family.
option.
It's almost family-like.
Yeah.
You know? And then care. You don't find many seniors. Do you find seniors in a co-op kind of environment?
I think you
Possibly.
You do. Okay.
do. Yeah.
So
It can be
care might be there.
multi-generational. Yeah, I think it is.
Okay. All right. And then co-housing.
High cost.
High
costs. High community.
Lots of community. Yeah.
Lots of community.
Yeah.
They're built around this idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely care is up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But convenience, I am skeptical about convenience. What do you think?
Well, there's
Darlene?
certain conveniences that a lot of them build into it. Like, for example, a lot of them share cars, let's say. You know, they'll build a
that
little
makes
parking lot
sense.
off to the side, and they'll only have 5 cars for 10 houses to save cost, save on the cost, but also to create a convenience for people that might not have otherwise had a car.
Okay.
And then having a shared workshop, or perhaps having bedrooms that people can rent when they visit. These are convenience factors.
Oh, yeah, that's
built
right.
into
You're
the
right.
model.
You know, if I may, I need to editorialize for a moment again, because I don't want to say I'm anti-home. I think homes are overrated. You know how
Yeah.
I'm not anti-marriage. I think marriage is overrated. I'm not anti-home, but I think homes are overrated.
I agree,
And
Peter.
I want to go on record. I own a home. I don't currently live in it. That's how overrated it is. So I've done it. You know what I mean? And especially as a solo, but in general, homes are incredibly costly. They're high status, right? They're part of the American dream. And so they're coveted. But you're paying a lot of money for a lot of space you use very infrequently. Right? So homes often have a dining room. They have guest rooms. They have basements, right? They might have a garage that you're not even using to house your car. You're using it to house a bunch of other stuff.
And you're just basically hitting the nail on the head as far as what co-housing communities sell. Shared
That's the market proposition.
resources that people rarely use. So
that
like
you
the
can
workshop.
pick, right? I only need the dining room on Friday night.
Why buy another lawnmower for
That's right.
every single house? You don't need it.
Yes. And so then you have a lawn that you use infrequently, but when you have a co-housing situation or a co-living situation, you have a lawn that people share.
That's right.
Not
And a
everybody needs
lawnmower
it at the
as
same
well.
time. Some people never need it. It's there. That, by the way, a shared toolbox. Thank you very much. Right? Like, I remember buying a drill. I needed a drill once. Right? And so you either go to your neighbors, right? Or you buy a drill.
Yeah.
And I remember I purposely bought a used drill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm going to buy an entirely new drill. I don't know how many times I'm going to need this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so any of these things that have that cost lower, and then by the way, if someone else cuts the grass, that ups your convenience. You know? And so because I have a very close friend. He lives in Minnesota. We talk about his suburban dad life. And regularly in the summer, I'll call him and I'm like, what are you up to? He goes, suburban dad life, cutting the grass today.
Yes.
Like, that's the big event.
It takes all day, so it's got to be.
Is cutting the grass.
Every 3 days.
I said to him, I don't think I'll ever cut another blade of grass in my life. I've cut a lot of grass in my life, especially as a boy doing jobs. I'm dealing with the skin cancer as a result of sitting in the sun cutting lots of grass, right? But he doesn't have much choice, in part because also he's like, it's good. It's kind of good for him in some ways. It gets him out of the house. He has a kind of thing. And so
part of the routine.
That brings up,
it becomes part of your routine.
I was saying it's another thing besides the 4 C's that I think maybe fits or maybe doesn't, but a lot of people do this because of environmental reasons. The sharing of resources, the lowering of costs, the lack of the lower consumption generally. So especially I would say with co-ops and co-housing, the consumption patterns and the environmental savings is a big motivation for some people. It doesn't fit necessarily in your C, but it makes a lot of sense for what you're talking about too.
Climate.
There you go. It's a 5C.
Co-climate.
Look, I mean, this is something that has come up in conversation, and it's a delicate topic. What is, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but what is the single most impactful thing that someone does when it comes to the climate crisis? And that's having a child, right? And so that's adding a person. One of the other most impactful things that people do is their housing situation and their transportation situation, right? And so you're suggesting ways that these shared living situations are beneficial when it comes to also climate change. That's outstanding.
Yep.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's their primary motivation.
That's interesting.
That's true.
That makes sense.
A lot of these places are built to the new codes of passive housing and zero. There's all these different buzzwords for all the different building codes, but almost all of them are built to these new codes so that they just don't waste as much power. They have lots of solar panels and rain capture.
And anytime you share walls, it's immediately environmentally more friendly, right? The moment you share a wall. And then obviously, like if you take, this is probably already obvious, but I'm just going to say it as someone who's now growingly anti-lawn, or lawns are overrated. And that is what would have been 10 lawns, 10 houses, now becomes essentially the equivalent of 2 lawns. That's a huge difference in water, fertilizer, carbon from cutting, time, and so on. So, and we know people are out there using the old school push mowers.
Who's going to do that?
Who's going to do that? It's hard. That's real work.
That's right.
This is really wonderful. So last thing that I want to do is I want to get your advice. I don't want your advice because I'm happy with my situation currently. But for the person who specifically tuned into this, shared living, that's interesting. I've always imagined myself doing a Golden Girls situation eventually and so on. Where do people start? How do they start thinking about this? Where do they go?
You want to start, Darlene?
Sure. Well, There's lots of great books. I mean, I read a couple. One was called Creating Co-Housing. The other one was called Creating a Life Together. There's a website for in the US, and there's another one in Canada. One cohousing.org and cohousing.ca, I believe.
I'll put all these in the exhibits, by the way,
tons
too.
of links. And they have so many webinars, and most of them are free. Some of them you have to pay for classes, and if you want to learn how to do sociocracy training or whatever. But a lot of them are just learning about different co-housing developments or co-living situations, or how to create them. Lots of great webinars during the pandemic. That's basically all I did, was tune into these free webinars all around the world. There were virtual tours of different co-housing developments. Yeah, you can go on there and learn all about it.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, for me, I guess it's more on the psychological side, like know yourself, know what you want. If we think about these 5 C's, which one's most important to you, or are none of them important to you? Like, if you like living by yourself, live by yourself, I guess. I have a little caveat around that I might mention, but
please.
But well, I just think so. I'm a single guy. It's really easy for me to live a really unchallenged life. My life's pretty easy, and so I have to intentionally create opportunities or think about opportunities to disrupt my life, to make it a little more challenging. And this is one reason why I think roommates are actually, I invite them, because they do disrupt my life, and for me that gives me more meaning and gives me more growth in life. So I think as a solo, it's, I think, especially easy to be comfortable. You don't have the kids whining and the spouse telling you to do
dishes
stuff.
in the
exactly.
sink. Yeah.
You kind of do what you want, which is the beauty of solo living. But also, it is detrimental in the sense that I think you can become too comfortable, too easy, whatever. So
the word is rigid. Say it, Ben.
Too rigid.
The word is
you can
rigid.
become too rigid, too selfish, whatever. There's a lot of options there.
Selfish.
But living with other people, it really pushes you out of your comfort zone. And I think in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to live with other people, it's fine, but consider the option. I guess that's one piece of advice. How might you grow if you did it? Might it actually be more, the best thing for you, even if you don't want to do it? But then beyond that, if you decide to do it, then why are you doing it? If it's to save money, then there's options for that. It's not probably co-living. If it's to have an adventure and go to new places and live for a short term in Bali or Chicago or whatever while you're working on your computer and all these things we'll probably talk about next week, then maybe it's co-living, right? But if you're aging and you want kids around and you want variety, then maybe it's co-housing. And so I think there's lots of different options. You just don't need to stick anymore with the single family home.
Or you take one and you do what you're doing with it and you create a different model with it.
Exactly. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I purchased this house. It wasn't because I wanted another house. I've got 3 at this point. And I also, Peter, I don't believe in houses. Like, I really don't. I'm like I spend a lot of my time traveling and I hate having things. But for me, this was pushing myself to do something new, to create something different, to provide value in the community that wasn't there before, because we don't have co-living as an option really in this community yet. So I want to kind of get it started. I want this to be kind of the start of something bigger. So for me, it is also about disruption.
Well, if it's not obvious to the listener, both Darlene and Ben are better people than I am, and so I'm thrilled to have them as
glad
voices.
you admit it, Peter. It is.
I will. My only defense is to do what you're describing, Ben. I travel and take psychedelics. Those
are good options too.
Also good options.
But what about one last question, and then I'll give my piece of advice. I think this is a good starting point for people to start to think about, there are options out there that aren't obvious. They're non-obvious, and that they might work for me, and I might read about it or take a webinar. I might tour some facilities, right? I'm sure in that way. Is there a way to experiment with these ideas, right? Like, so instead of making a year lease is a bizarre invention to me. Why is it that every place has a year lease, And so if you want to experiment with these ideas, actually get dirty, muck it up, like Ben likes to do, how does someone try to approach that?
Well, I'll give my opinion, and then Darlene maybe can jump in. So co-living is designed as usually 4-month minimum leases. So it's not a year long. In fact, that's part of the model is they want people moving through. They want it to be temporary as a part of the model. So I'm keeping my house that I'm living in now. I'm also doing this co-living thing that I'm going to keep a room there, experiment with that. I have resources I can do that. So I guess I'm lucky that way. Maybe if you have resources, you can do both and experiment in that way. I don't know, Darlene, if you can experiment with co-housing or,
that's a pretty
I
big
know it's something
experiment.
That's
not something
you
you
have
just
to kind
dabble
of
in.
leap in. Jump
Well,
in.
yeah, and I'm certainly not committed to any of these because I've just become kind of interested in them in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
So yes, I have a roommate now, and that's working out really well. And like you described, Ben, actually, that was part of my thinking. It wasn't just out of necessity. It was, if I want to go down this road and try these other things, maybe I should get back into the habit's the right word.
Yeah, get used to having sharing a space.
Confront this sharing of space with somebody. So it's been good, stretching me a little,
Great.
and also saving me money at the same time.
Yeah.
But as far as dabbling, I don't know. Other than the fact that it's funny you should say about the real estate and how you dislike the buying and the selling and making money off of that. And I joined this real estate investing group thinking, oh, this is interesting. I might learn a thing or two about creating a co-living. In my mind, I was imagining it being creative solutions for and it was very much what you described, Peter. It's very much the buying and selling and the profiting off of houses, which is still interesting, but I think it's a little out of control these days.
Yeah, and I think it's fine if you want to have real estate as part of an investment portfolio, but I would say buy a REIT, rather than buy a home, that kind of thing. Yeah. So my parting advice is you could start by taking a survey at onesharedhouse2030.com. This is a website that Ben or Darlene told me about. And we have each taken this survey, and it takes you through many of the options about what your preferences for shared living might look like. And bonus material is back. So if you join the three of us on the Solo Slack channel at petermcgraw.org/solo, you can hear our subsequent conversation where we talk about our preferences for what shared living would look like, because each of us have gone to onesharedhouse2030.com and done the survey. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. So with that, I want to say, Darlene, thank you for forcing yourself onto this podcast.
You're welcome. No, thank you for having me.
That's really not true.
Fun.
I called Darlene to have a conversation to make sure she was normal. And then once I figured out that she was the delight that she is, I invited her to co-host an episode.
Yes,
and
then true. He vetted me
to do this. And then Darlene vetted Ben, because I had no idea that he was going to be as thoughtful and knowledgeable about this as he is. And I think in many ways, the two of you are really inspirations for people who are considering doing something different that might fit their lifestyle better. So with that, I want to say thank you.
Thank you. It was super fun.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.